I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The cafe smelled of oversteamed milk and the faint bitterness of dark roast. I hovered by the counter, pretending to scroll through my phone, though the screen had gone gray minutes ago. She was there, tucked into the corner booth by the window, a thermos half forgotten beside her purse. Her hair, the kind that caught light without trying, fell loosely across her shoulders. "Hey," she said, looking up as I stepped closer. Her voice wasn't loud, not exactly, but it carried across the low hum of espresso machines. The usual. I hesitated. "Oh yeah, thanks." I realized I hadn't ordered the usual in months, maybe years, but somehow she still remembered. She smiled, a flicker in the corner of her mouth, and I felt it in my chest more than I wanted to. I found a stool at the counter, fingers brushing the edge as I sat. She slid my drink over without a word, and our hands brushed briefly. I didn't pull away immediately. I didn't know if I wanted to. The cafe moved around us. Cash register clicks, a soft laugh from the table near the window. But she seemed anchored, like a familiar constellation in a half-forgotten sky. I sipped the coffee, too hot, and watched her eyes flick to her watch, then back to a small notebook she always carried. A pen rested lightly between her fingers, tapping once, twice, then still. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Sometimes a glance said more than a paragraph. I noticed the way her hands curved around the thermos, how she tucked the loose hair behind her ear, the tiny pause before she took a sip as if she were measuring something unspoken. I checked my phone, though I knew there was nothing. A half-written text lingered in drafts, a line I could never send. "See you later," it said, but I didn't. I never did. "Busy day?" she asked finally, her voice quiet, like she was careful not to wake the world around us. "Yeah," I said, shrugging. My words sounded smaller than I felt. "You?" "Same. Just errands," she replied, eyes scanning the cafe briefly, then back to me. That flicker again, the one that made me want to tell her something I wasn't sure I could. I laughed softly at nothing, at the small absurdity of it all. She tilted her head, almost like she was studying me, but her expression didn't betray anything. She folded a napkin in precise halves, careful, deliberate. My eyes flicked to her hands, to the subtle movements, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. "Want a cookie?" she offered, nodding toward the plate beside her. I shook my head, but I didn't move right away. There was a silence between us that wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted, like a promise we couldn't name. When it was time to leave, she stood, gathering her things with quiet efficiency. Our eyes met briefly, long enough for something unspoken to pass. I said goodbye, but it wasn't really goodbye. My hands lingered on the counter, and I noticed a faint trace of where hers had brushed mine. Outside, the wind caught the hem of my jacket. I pulled my phone from my pocket, her name in my contacts, and saw a message waiting. It was her. It was just a mistake, it read. I stared at the words, at the screen, and felt the air shift around me. Mistake, or was something else entirely. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't know what to do next. The next weekend, she invited me over to help with some boxes she'd been meaning to sort in her garage. I said yes before thinking, my stomach tightening in that way it always did when I knew she'd be around. The garage smelled of old cedar and dust, with a faint trace of the vanilla candle she always had burning. I carried a box, and she followed behind, her movements careful, deliberate. "Be careful with that one," she said, glancing at the label. Her voice had the same soft, almost conspiratorial tone as the cafe, like we were sharing a small secret. We worked mostly in silence. Every so often, she'd hum under her breath, a tune I didn't recognize, and I found myself imagining what her life was like when I wasn't around. Divorced for a few years, she lived alone, and I had my part-time job, my apartment full of unpacked boxes and unread books. Neither of us had expected to notice the other. Yet somehow, here we were. "Did you ever go camping as a kid?" she asked suddenly, leaning over a shelf. Yeah, a few times," I said. My hands were busy moving things, but I felt the slight tilt of her head as she listened. "Me too. My dad had this old tent that always leaked, but we didn't care. We'd sleep under the stars anyway, she said. Her voice softened, like the memory was a touchstone, a piece of herself she rarely shared. I realized I wanted to hear more, wanted to be the one she told it to. I wondered if she thought about the age gap at all, or my connection to her son. I imagined scenarios where everything went wrong, where the world caught up and pulled us apart before we even started. My chest tightened at the thought, and I shoved the worry aside, folding a blanket neatly and pretending I wasn't thinking about her in the way I had been for weeks. She handed me a cup of tea after we finished sorting a shelf. Her fingers brushed mine briefly, accidental or not, I couldn't tell. I felt the warmth linger, like a current I wasn't supposed to acknowledge. We sat down on the edge of a workbench, not far from the boxes, and for a long moment there was nothing but the quiet sound of the kettle cooling and our breathing. I watched her fingers trace the rim of her cup. She caught me looking and offered a small smile, the kind that made me feel seen without a word. "Thanks," I said softly. "For what?" "For just being here," I muttered. The words sounded clumsy, and I flushed when I realized how true they were. She tilted her head, lips twitching, not correcting me, just letting the moment exist. When she stood to leave the garage, she rested her hand lightly on my shoulder, a touch so brief it could have been a friendly gesture. But I felt it deep in my chest, the way you feel a note that resonates long after it's played. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And yet, underneath that warmth, there was a quiet hum of tension, a reminder that this connection was risky, fragile, and unspoken. I found her at the small bookstore downtown, tucked into the poetry section like she always seemed to disappear into quiet corners. I lingered near the philosophy shelves, pretending to read, though my eyes kept flicking toward her. She glanced up once, caught me, and smiled, a quick, easy curve of lips that made my chest tighten. But she looked away almost immediately, back at the spines of books, fingers brushing titles without really seeing them. That pause, like she didn't want me to notice how long she'd looked, was enough to make my stomach knot. "You wandered over." "Hey," I said, voice low, careful not to draw attention. "Hey," she replied, eyes still scanning the shelves. Her hand hovered over a collection of sonnets, and then she pulled back, like she'd caught herself touching something she shouldn't. We moved through the aisles together, slow, careful, and I felt the tension coil tighter with every step. I wanted to ask something, anything, but my words faltered. A friend of hers appeared near the cashier, laughing at something on their phone. She stiffened, eyes flicking toward them, and I realized she noticed the complication before I did. Her hand brushed mine, brief and accidental, or maybe deliberate, but she pulled away faster than usual. I froze, unsure if I should follow, leave, or just stay put. My throat felt dry, my fingers twitching. We ended up by a small reading nook, a stack of books at our feet, sitting on opposite chairs but leaning a fraction closer than necessary. "Do you come here often?" I asked, almost a joke, but my voice betrayed the hesitation underneath. She laughed softly, the sound careful, restrained. "Not really," she said, eyes dropping to her hands, twisting a ring absent-mindedly. "Just sometimes." Her silence filled the gaps between us, and I wanted to bridge it with something, words, a touch, but I stopped myself. She looked like she might pull back if I tried too much. A moment passed, heavy and quiet. I noticed the curl of her hair falling across her forehead, and I brushed it back with the gentlest touch. Her eyes widened slightly. I caught myself staring too long, memorizing the line of her jaw, the softness of her gaze. She tilted her head, like she wanted to say something but didn't. I leaned closer, drawn by the small proximity, the magnetic pull I couldn't name. Our faces were just a breath apart, and I could feel the hesitation in her, mirrored my own. Then footsteps. Someone browsing the next aisle, clearing their throat, reminding us that we existed in the world beyond this fragile bubble. She straightened, took a small step back, and smiled, that same quiet curve of lips, like a secret being closed and locked away. I swallowed. My heart was hammering in my chest, my hands fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. We said goodbye, Not quite meeting eyes, not quite touching, but something lingered in the air. A near kiss, a half confession, a tension neither of us named. Walking home, I couldn't shake the memory of her hand, the way it had brushed mine, the hesitation and heat of that close moment. And I realized I wanted more, though I didn't know if she did too. She didn't answer my calls that evening, or the next. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone warm in my hand, staring at the blank screen like it could explain everything. When she finally appeared 2 days later, it was in the park near her apartment, the late afternoon sun soft on her hair. I waited on the bench, hands gripping the wooden slats, trying to keep my heartbeat from announcing itself. She approached slowly, arms crossed over her chest, eyes downcast. She didn't smile at first, and I felt a pang, the sort of quiet sting that comes from realizing you're not a certainty in someone else's world. "Hey," I said, voice careful. "Too careful." "Hey," she replied, finally lifting her gaze, but it was guarded, like she'd built a wall I wasn't supposed to cross. We walked slowly, side by side, the gravel crunching beneath our feet. I wanted to reach out, to brush her hand, to say something that would make all the unspoken things real. But something in her posture stopped me. Shoulders tight, eyes flicking to the horizon, pretending not to notice me. "Did something happen?" I asked finally. My words were small. "No, nothing," she said quickly, almost too quickly. Then she paused, looking at a small patch of wildflowers near the path. "I just needed space," she added, softer this time. I swallowed. Space. The word echoed. I wanted to ask why. Wanted to tell her I'd waited, that I'd thought about nothing else, but the syllables stuck in my throat. We stopped by a bench under a white oak. She sat first, folding her hands in her lap. I perched on the edge beside her, careful not to crowd the space. "Do you ever regret things?" I asked almost to myself. She glanced at me, the corners of her mouth twitching like she was holding back a sigh. "Sometimes," she admitted, voice low. "I think about mistakes, things I can't take back." Her eyes found mine, lingering just a second too long. I wanted to tell her then about the way I noticed her at the cafe, the garage, the bookstore, about how every glance, every small touch had meant more than I should have allowed. But I didn't. I just shifted on the bench, fingers fiddling with the seam of my jeans, heart hammering. She shifted too, just slightly, a subtle tilt, the smallest movement that said she wanted to reach across the space between us, but was stopping herself. I started, voice breaking just slightly, then stopped. The words didn't come. Instead, I let my hand hover over the space between us, trembling almost imperceptibly. She didn't move hers, didn't pull back completely. Just let the air hold us, tense, full of things we hadn't dared to say. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, and for a long moment, there was nothing but that small, quiet pause. And I realized I couldn't tell if she wanted me to move closer or if she needed me to stay still. I wanted to ask, wanted to confess, but all I could manage was a whisper that didn't leave my lips. "Do you want this?" And she looked at me, eyes wide, searching, but she didn't answer. Not yet. I thought maybe things would change after the park. That maybe the silence between us had stretched long enough to snap into something real. But the next evening, I saw him, her ex, I guessed, though she never mentioned him, leaning against the doorway of her apartment building, laughing at something on his phone. I froze halfway down the steps, my chest tight. She waved, casually, as if everything about this encounter was ordinary, but it wasn't ordinary to me. I pretended to check my messages on my phone, letting the moment pass without moving closer. My hand shook just slightly. I wanted to turn and leave, but something kept me rooted. She noticed me from the doorway, eyes flicking, then quickly back to him. There was that half smile, the one that always made me feel I was just one step behind. That night, I walked past the park bench where we'd almost said the words we couldn't, hoping for some clarity in the familiar. The bench was empty, the air thick with the scent of wet grass after an early rain. I sat, hands clasped, thinking about her, thinking about the small spaces we'd shared, the cafe, the garage, the bookstore, and how quickly they felt like home. But now, home was a little farther away, like a door left ajar that might never open again. I imagined her with him, laughing, touching, the casual intimacy that belonged to someone else. My chest tightened, not from anger, not exactly, but from a quiet ache I couldn't name. I wasn't heartbroken. Not yet. I was paused. She texted me later, but the message wasn't for me. Or at least, I couldn't be sure. Busy tonight. Maybe tomorrow. It was small, neutral, but my mind unraveled it, tried to read between lines that didn't exist. I stared at it, thumb hovering, unsure if I should reply or let it sit. I didn't reply. I didn't want to break the fragile equilibrium we'd built, or whatever it was we were pretending to have. The next day, I passed the cafe where it had started, where she remembered my order without a thought. The seat she usually took by the window was empty. I sat there anyway, tracing the rim of my coffee cup with my finger, watching the steam curl into nothing. A couple walked past, laughing. The barista called out a name I didn't recognize, and I realized the ordinary had gone on without me, that my small world had contracted to the memory of her presence. Now just a ghost in the chair across from me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence, leaving me mid-thought, suspended in a quiet, unresolved ache. The thermos on the counter gleamed in the morning light. I wanted to touch it, to fold the napkin she always did, to leave something behind that said I'd been there, but I didn't. And so I walked out, leaving the chair empty, leaving my words unsent, leaving the story suspended between us, waiting for a moment that might never come. Here's part 6, 500 words, the emotional climax, keeping it intimate, subtle, and grounded in the Kitako, slow burn style. I found her in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter. She was stirring something in a mug, the way she always did when she wanted to keep her hands busy. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should speak or turn around. "Hey," I said finally, voice low. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, a flicker of surprise and something else. Recognition, maybe, or hesitation. "Hey," she replied, soft, cautious. I took a step closer. My chest tightened with every movement. The air between us was quiet, but not empty, charged like it had been for weeks, months, in fragments and pauses. I've been thinking," I started. My hands twisted the hem of my shirt. "About everything." She didn't move, didn't interrupt. She just leaned on the counter, fingers wrapped lightly around the mug. "I don't want to mess things up." Or, I faltered, words tangling. "Or make it harder than it already is." Her eyes softened. She set the mug down, fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. I felt the weight of the gesture, small and quiet, but enough to make my heart skip. "I know," she said, voice just above a whisper. "I've been thinking too. About us." She paused, eyes dropping to the counter. "About how much I want it and how much I can't." I nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. The gap between us, age, her life, my place in it, it wasn't just numbers. It was everything we weren't supposed to be. And yet, somehow, here we were, suspended in the space where rules didn't exist, only moments. I stepped closer, careful, tentative. "I don't know if I should say it," I admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Her hand lingered near mine. She didn't pull away. She didn't rush me. "I can't stop thinking about you either," she admitted, quietly, letting the words settle like dust in the sun. For a long moment, we just stood there, hands almost touching, neither of us crossing the line, both understanding the cost of the next move. Vulnerability hung in the air, heavy and raw. Finally, she let her fingers brush mine, lightly, intentionally. A touch that said everything we hadn't said. A silent agreement that this, whatever it was ours to acknowledge, even if the world outside wouldn't understand. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension release. "Okay," I whispered. She nodded, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Okay," she echoed. No grand declarations. No shouting. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a human connection that said, in the simplest terms, that we had chosen each other, even if only for this moment, even if only in this small kitchen with sunlight falling across our hands. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle inside me. Not resolution, not certainty, just presence. Weeks had passed. The cafe still smelled the same, coffee sharp and warm, but now it felt different. Familiar in a way that wasn't just routine. I slid into the corner booth at 8:47 a.m., my usual black coffee waiting, the steam curling like it always did. She arrived a few minutes later, holding her thermos, fingers brushing the rim as she set it down. We didn't rush greetings. A small smile, a tilt of her head, and suddenly the air between us was lighter, quieter. The awkward hesitation from before had softened into something steady, something earned. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, watching her hands fold the napkin beside her cup, the same way she always did. A gesture I noticed months ago, but now it felt like a private signal, an unspoken rhythm only I understood. We talked about small things. Her son's new internship, a documentary I'd seen, a stray cat near my apartment. No declarations, no confessions, just life, threaded through our presence in the same space. And somehow that was enough. Later, we walked to the park, the bench under the oak waiting for us. The one where everything had almost been said, the one where pauses had held more weight than words. We sat, shoulder to shoulder, feet brushing lightly, each of us sipping our tea, the quiet stretching comfortably between us. I realized how much easier it felt now to just be near her. No secret tension, no pauses weighed with unspoken fears. Just presence. She laughed at something small, a bird pecking at the path, and I felt the warmth in my chest, familiar and grounding. There were still moments of awareness. Age, life, past mistakes, but they didn't press as heavily as they once did. They were threads woven into the fabric of what we were, not barriers keeping us apart. She flicked her eyes toward mine, a glance so soft it barely registered to anyone else, and I smiled, letting my hand brush hers on the bench. Not a grab, not a claim, just a touch that said everything we didn't need a voice. I thought of all the small markers along the way. The cafe, the garage, the bookstore, the texts unsent, the benches, the black coffee at 8:47 a.m. Each memory a breadcrumb that had led us here to this ordinary, quiet kind of togetherness. She looked at me, head tilted, and I realized she didn't need me to say anything. She already knew, and I didn't need to say anything either. Life wasn't perfect. Things weren't fixed. There would be errands, work, moments when we'd forget and remember again why this was complicated. But in the small, measured beats of daily routine, we were present. Fully. And that was enough. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread. She did the same with her tea, eyes on the steam, curling in familiar patterns. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Some things weren't meant to be shouted. Some things were just meant to be lived slowly, carefully, in sync with someone who had chosen to be there. And I thought, softly to myself, some things are remembered in small ways, like a hand on a napkin or a thermos left slightly askew. And that's enough to know it's real.